Right now, a secret audio recording sits locked inside a sealed court file, and Blake Lively is fighting harder than ever to make sure the public never hears it. What's on that tape could upend everything she's claimed about Justin Baldoni, but here's the twist: the man who was recorded without his consent is the one demanding it be released. Blake built her case around allegations of verbal abuse, grabbing headlines overnight, yet now she's desperate to bury the very proof she submitted. Meanwhile, Steve Sowitz, whose voice appears on that recording, is begging the court to unseal every word in a bizarre reversal where the accused is asking for transparency while the accuser hides behind confidentiality. When someone secretly records you, edits the quotes, and uses them to destroy your reputation, wouldn't you want the full truth out? This isn't just another Hollywood lawsuit, it's a battle over narrative control and the power of selective evidence. Blake got her moment of outrage, the sympathy, the viral headlines about toxic behavior. But what happens if the full conversation tells a different story? What if the person she secretly recorded is armed with the one weapon she fears most: context? That audio could either end Justin Baldoni's reputation for good or expose Blake Lively as someone willing to weaponize a recording to manipulate the media. And judging by how aggressively she's fighting to keep it sealed, it's not hard to guess which outcome she's afraid of. A week ago, Blake thought she'd executed the perfect legal strike by filing a sealed declaration demanding triple damages, accusing Baldoni's lawsuit of being retaliation under California Law 47.1, which allows victims to collect enormous payouts if they can prove backlash after credible assault claims. Bold move, except what was meant to protect her may now destroy her case. Hidden within that filing is testimony from an anonymous witness who reportedly supplied the explosive recording of Steve Sowitz. And while her legal team insists on confidentiality for safety reasons, the timing is suspect. Blake files the declaration, headlines explode, and suddenly the mystery tape becomes Hollywood's most talked about secret. The question now isn't whether the recording exists, it's what happens when the court decides the world deserves to hear it. Blake Lively accused Justin Baldoni of verbal abuse, then immediately moved to seal nearly every detail of her evidence, seeking the shock value of headlines without the scrutiny of context, the damage without accountability, leaving her court filing looking more like a classified intelligence document than a legal record. Blacked out paragraphs, missing pages, and only scattered fragments remain visible. References to a conversation with Steve Sowitz, allegations of verbal aggression, and timestamps pointing to an unnamed audio recording. Blake Lively had offered just enough to ignite public outrage but not enough for anyone to verify what truly happened. Wayfair Studios, representing Sowitz, immediately sensed discrepancies. They had no objection to shielding an anonymous witness, that's standard protocol. Their concern ran deeper. The supposed smoking gun featured their client, yet he had never consented to being recorded, and now his private words were being used against him through selective edits while the full audio stayed hidden from both the public and the court. What Blake didn't anticipate was Sowitz's counterpunch. Instead of denying or minimizing the recording, he demanded total transparency, insisting that if edited sound bites were used to destroy his reputation, the only fair response was to release the full truth. What appeared to be a legal declaration was, in reality, a media strategy disguised as evidence, allowing Blake to spark headlines, control the narrative, and then hide behind confidentiality laws to prevent scrutiny. But when the person you secretly record fights back with the unedited version of your own evidence, the strategy begins to unravel. The mystery witness may have believed they were strengthening Blake's case, yet they may have inadvertently handed her opponents the tool that dismantles it, because when you record someone without consent and that person demands transparency, your selective edits become public business. Wayfair's lawyers uncovered something that flipped Blake's approach entirely. Their legal response revealed that the recording did capture Sowitz during a private exchange with the anonymous witness, but only dramatic snippets had been submitted, stripped of surrounding context to frame them as verbal aggression. What remained hidden were the moments before and after, the parts that could completely reshape the meaning. Consider how it unfolded. Someone aligned with Blake secretly recorded Sowitz during what he believed was a private conversation. That audio was then handed to Blake's legal team, who pulled the most incriminating lines, inserted them into her declaration, and filed the selective excerpts in court, instantly generating headlines about abuse. But just as the media frenzy peaked, her attorneys moved to seal the full recording from public access. She wanted impact, not investigation. Yet her own filing confirmed the existence of exact timestamps, minute and second markers, proving she had the full recording, not just fragments. When someone possesses complete evidence but releases only select clips, it usually means the unedited version undermines their narrative. Wayfair's legal response struck hard, accusing Blake's team of secretly recording their client without consent, weaponizing edited sound bites to destroy his reputation, and then hiding behind confidentiality laws to dodge accountability. Their stance was blunt: release the full tape and let the world hear what Steve Sowitz actually said, not a media-tailored version. Then came the most revealing admission. Blake acknowledged in her own filing that unsealing the recording could cause her adverse media exposure. That line made her motives unmistakable. She wasn't protecting privacy. She was protecting optics. She had already fueled public outrage with selected quotes but now claimed transparency would be harmful. So which is it? She wanted publicity when it benefited her, but secrecy when the full story threatened her image. The alleged abuse may sound damning in isolation, but context, the moments before and after, could tell a very different story. What if the confrontation was a professional dispute escalated in the heat of the moment? What if the tone described as aggressive was actually defensive? Those are the details her side is fighting to suppress. Wayfair's filing went further, accusing her of manipulating evidence by extracting provocative lines, feeding them to the press, and using sealed records as a shield against scrutiny. That's not presenting facts. That's constructing a narrative. Investigators began questioning the timeline. When exactly was this recording made? Before Blake's accusations or afterward as part of a calculated setup? Did she direct or encourage the anonymous witness to initiate it? The sealed sections of her declaration reportedly contain those key answers, and they're the very pages she is most determined to keep hidden. What remains undisputed is that Steve Sowitz never consented. His privacy was breached, his words were distorted, and his reputation was dismantled through headlines built on incomplete evidence. Yet he is demanding full disclosure, while the accuser pleads for silence. That contrast speaks for itself. When the secretly recorded party demands transparency and the accuser demands secrecy, it becomes clear who's confident in the truth. But this battle isn't just about public perception, it's about legality. In California, where the recording likely occurred, secretly taping someone without consent is not only unethical but potentially criminal. California is a strict two-party consent state, meaning both sides must agree to be recorded. Sowitz never did. That means Blake's so-called evidence may not only be inadmissible, it may itself be illegal. And if the court rules that the very tape she tried to weaponize was unlawfully obtained, it could become the evidence that destroys her entire case. Yet Blake now claims she's keeping it sealed to protect privacy. Whose privacy? The person who conducted a secret, unauthorized recording? That's not privacy protection, that's damage control. It's evidence tampering disguised as legal procedure. Blake violated Steve Sowitz's privacy to obtain the recording, then invoked privacy law to keep it sealed from scrutiny. The irony is impossible to ignore. Her legal strategy hinges on a piece of evidence that may itself violate state and federal wiretapping laws, yet she's the one demanding silence. Meanwhile, Sowitz, the actual victim of the unauthorized recording, is calling for full transparency, insisting the entire audio be released because he knows the unedited version will expose her selective framing. From a legal standpoint, the situation is glaring. Secretly recording someone without consent in a two-party consent state like California is potentially criminal, and using that illegal recording to attack someone's character while concealing full context is evidence manipulation. Hiding behind privacy claims to stop the recorded party from defending himself with the complete truth is not protection, it's weaponization of legal process. Wayfair's attorneys laid it out bluntly. Blake may have acquired evidence through unlawful means, exploited it for sensational headlines, and is now attempting to claim rights she forfeited the moment she orchestrated a secret recording. They aren't simply disputing her version of events, they're exposing her method. The jurisdiction matters too. If this conversation occurred in New York, one-party consent could make recording lawful. But all indications point to California, where both parties must consent. That means the anonymous witness may have committed a felony while aiding Blake, and her reliance on that recording could obliterate her case. The consent flaw shatters her credibility. Someone who secretly records private conversations, edits them to sound incriminating, and leaks them to fuel outrage isn't acting like a victim, it's manipulation dressed as advocacy. Steve Sowitz is demanding the release of his own words, which Blake cannot legally or ethically claim as her private material. She cannot use selective leaks to shape headlines and then hide behind confidentiality when context threatens her narrative. And that's only the beginning of her unraveling. The way Blake's legal team is resisting transparency reveals more than simple caution. It exposes a calculated pattern of narrative control. They aren't merely asking the court to keep evidence sealed. They're using every procedural maneuver available to control what the public sees and what the press is allowed to report. Their desperation bleeds through every filing, reading less like legal argument and more like reputation management masquerading as due process. Their reasoning is deceptively simple. They insist the full audio must remain sealed to prevent additional media attention that could be harmful to Blake. But fear of bad publicity has never been a valid legal basis for withholding evidence. Courts, particularly in the Southern District of New York, have rejected that justification repeatedly. Yet her team keeps pressing it as if persistence might turn a weak claim into a legitimate one. Wayfair's attorneys called it exactly what it is: broad, intentional obstruction. Blake isn't shielding a witness, she's shielding her image. Her sealing request doesn't just hide the witness's identity, it aims to conceal the timing of the meeting, the conversation's context, and everything said before and after the alleged abuse. None of those details would compromise anonymity, but they could reveal whether Blake intentionally orchestrated the recording after filing her claims. In other words, she wants to bury the very context that could expose her strategy. Consider the sequence: she released selective quotes from the tape, sparked a wave of abuse headlines, and let the media narrative take off. Now that the story risks collapsing, she's demanding that the full recording remain buried. That's not legal prudence, that's PR containment disguised as confidentiality. The most revealing part? Her own filings acknowledge that the public interest in the case was triggered by her decision to include the alleged quotations in the first place. She lit the fire and now wants legal protection from the flames. Wayfair's response dismantles her position point by point, arguing that her sealing request fails the narrow tailoring rule. She's attempting to block far more material than necessary, not to protect safety but to protect her curated narrative. The suppressed details, the timing, the setup, the lead-up, would likely show whether the recording was staged after her complaint or was truly authentic evidence. That's the truth she doesn't want exposed. And that's where her legal panic becomes most obvious. Her team knows that if the full audio is released, the contrast between her edited quotes and the real conversation could obliterate her credibility, and the timestamps might even show the discussion took place after her legal team began drafting filings, suggesting not documentation, but orchestration. They know the full dialogue might reveal that what Blake labeled as verbal abuse was completely taken out of context. Then comes the most incriminating admission of all: her entire argument for sealing the recording is not based on safety, witness protection, or legal necessity, but on protecting herself from bad publicity. She isn't claiming danger. She's claiming embarrassment. Yet she believes she can invoke privacy rights over someone else's words, despite the fact that the person speaking, Steve Sowitz, is demanding those very words be made public. She is attempting to control another person's speech while simultaneously framing herself as silenced and victimized. The hypocrisy is undeniable. What's emerging, according to legal analysts, is a strategy of calculated opacity: release partial information to steer the narrative, conceal the rest under confidentiality claims, and then claim persecution when challenged. This is no longer about a single recording. It's about her exploiting the legal system as a stage to manufacture public perception. But the more she tries to suppress context, the clearer her manipulation becomes, because when the secretly recorded party begs for transparency and the accuser begs for silence, it doesn't take legal expertise to see who's actually confident in the truth. Blake's approach reveals a systematic pattern, allegedly creating evidence through questionable or potentially illegal tactics, selectively distributing favorable excerpts to trigger media outrage, then weaponizing privacy law to block investigation. Her legal team, rather than defending a victim, appears to be enabling high-level evidence engineering, operating with a precision that goes beyond ordinary litigation strategy. Now, multiple sources, not just Wayfair, are signaling possible evidence manipulation, pointing to a wider, coordinated effort to control both the courtroom and the headlines. Analysts suggest this could be one of the most calculated PR legal hybrids Hollywood has ever seen. She has already been accused of taking statements out of context and even threatening independent reporters with baseless legal claims, alleging without proof that they were secretly paid by Justin Baldoni. If she is willing to fabricate motives for journalists, then manipulating evidence against defendants becomes far more believable. At the center of it all is the sealed recording that allegedly exposes the full playbook. Acquire evidence through dubious means, release only the most sensational fragments, use the media to inflame public opinion, invoke confidentiality to suppress context, and finally, adopt the victim role the moment transparency is requested. What she calls legal protection is increasingly being seen for what it is: manipulation disguised as courtroom strategy in a sharply escalating legal dispute. Newly surfaced court filings suggest that Blake strategically leveraged selective excerpts from a confidential recording to generate media sympathy, while simultaneously working to block release of the full audio, raising questions about narrative manipulation rather than organic evidence gathering. Legal documents indicate efforts to obscure key details such as the timing of the meeting and how the recording was obtained, not to protect witnesses but to prevent scrutiny over whether the interaction was staged after her initial claim. Wayfair's attorneys argue that Blake constructed a misleading storyline by isolating provocative comments to fuel damaging headlines, all while obstructing verification that could contradict her portrayal. In contrast, the recorded party, Steve Sowitz, is demanding full public disclosure, implying that the unedited material likely undermines Blake's accusations and could expose selective editing as a calculated tactic. Observers note that had Sowitz not challenged her version, the curated snippets may have gone unchecked, but his insistence on transparency shifts the issue from emotional appeal to possible evidence tampering. This alleged strategy appears to extend beyond one recording, reflecting a broader pattern of media-driven legal maneuvering with growing consequences. Further controversy surrounds claims of judicial bias in her favor, as Judge Louis Lyman faces scrutiny for rulings perceived to disproportionately benefit Blake and Ryan Reynolds. Critics point to several decisions that diverge from standard precedent, casting doubt on the court's neutrality. One notable incident involved Lyman initially ordering the release of privileged communications from Katie Cassie and Brianna Costello, only to reverse course when it was revealed the material involved a protected client. The reversal has sparked debate over whether it was judicial oversight or preferential treatment, intensifying concerns about fairness within the proceedings. Critics argue that Blake's legal strategy is being quietly reinforced by procedural advantages, as her requests to seal documents are routinely approved while Wayfair's efforts to pursue transparency, often backed by legal precedent, are stalled or denied, fueling growing concern over judicial consistency. Legal analysts tracking the case warn that this pattern threatens not only the credibility of the court but also the integrity of the broader process. While Blake's team claims that Wayfair already possesses substantial evidence, observers suggest this assertion is part of a calculated effort to control perception rather than facts. Through selective framing, hyper-aggressive legal maneuvering, and exploitation of fragmented media coverage, Blake appears to be orchestrating a dual-front defense that merges courtroom filings with public relations strategy. This case has quickly evolved into a study in how modern litigation can blur the boundary between legal advocacy and narrative engineering, with headlines crafted as carefully as affidavits. Each sealed motion, redacted brief, and carefully timed media leak contributes to a controlled storyline designed to shield Blake from scrutiny while limiting counterexposure. Analysts caution that if left unchecked, this method could set a dangerous precedent for how high-profile figures weaponize confidentiality and curated publicity to influence legal outcomes. As mounting pressure pushes for full disclosure, cracks are beginning to show in Blake's tightly managed image, hinting that her approach, rooted in selective transparency and procedural obstruction, may ultimately backfire, jeopardizing not just her defense but public trust in the fairness of celebrity litigation. Judge Lyman's pattern of rulings favoring Blake, even when valid procedural objections were raised by Wayfair, has intensified concerns about judicial bias. In one notable instance, Wayfair argued that Blake's team submitted new privilege logs past the permitted deadline, yet the judge allowed them regardless, effectively dismissing the objection without meaningful consideration. Such decisions, repeated over time, have created the perception that the court is leaning toward one side. When a federal judge feels compelled to publicly deny accusations of favoritism, it signals how deeply his impartiality is already in doubt. Once that credibility erodes, every ruling, no matter how routine, is scrutinized through the lens of potential partiality, destabilizing the legal proceedings. The tension escalates further given that Judge Lyman holds authority over whether Blake's secret recording will be unsealed, the pivotal evidence that could reveal manipulation or misrepresentation. Based on his prior rulings, Wayfair has legitimate reason to question whether that decision will be made fairly. Yet bias from the bench may ultimately be overshadowed by the recording itself. If released in full, it could dismantle Blake's central narrative, which hinges on portraying herself as a victim of retaliation. Any proof of selective editing, misleading context, or deliberate provocation would obliterate her credibility as a witness. Even more damaging would be evidence suggesting the recording was staged after the fact to bolster her claims. In that scenario, this would no longer be viewed as a legal dispute but as a calculated operation to manufacture public sympathy and courtroom leverage. Such exposure would send shockwaves through her case, unraveling not just one argument but the entire framework of her allegations against Justin Baldoni and Wayfair Studios. Ultimately, the unsealing of that recording carries the potential to redefine the trajectory of the lawsuit, reshape public perception, and devastate the legal foundation Blake has spent months constructing.